It's a history that I think needs to be told.
I think it tells a good story about education and the history of blacks in America.
I think the spirit of the show is just eternal optimism and hope.
The music definitely leaves a trace. You can feel the history in it, so it's still very powerful today.
I get moved whenever we're singing the songs personally, and I just think that it's so important that people reach back and grab what's important, and those songs are important, so I'm so glad that this work is being done.
Have some wonderful talent. It's just a dream come true to have some beautiful singing, just absolutely beautiful singing. I know that Mother would be very happy to hear these fabulous voices.
Tawawa House is a story that's going to be told over and over again, all over the country, all over the world. I believe that.
Something truly amazing took place in Modesto, California in the spring of 2014. A fully staged production with full orchestra of Zenobia Powell Perry's opera, Tawawa House. Tawawa House is no ordinary opera. It is about the struggles of African Americans and whites on the Underground Railroad before and during the American Civil War. This grand resort hotel, intended for white Southern gentlemen, their black mistresses, and their mixed-race children, became the first African-American owned and managed university in the country, all in Wilberforce, Ohio. This is the story of Tawawa House.
Tawawa House originally was a resort hotel for white Southern gentlemen, their African-American mistresses, and their mixed-race children. The workers at the hotel were former slaves, runaway slaves, and free African Americans. It became an important stop on the Underground Railroad because it was easy to conceal who was a slave, who was free, and to harbor new arrivals in the 200 guest rooms. Wilberforce is not that far from the Ohio River and a very well-known place along the river that served as a part of the Underground Railroad. Abolitionists on the Ohio side kept watch for runaway slaves coming from Kentucky and helped them get across and then hid them. As the resort began to fail financially, as the prospects of the Civil War became a reality, local church people, including abolitionists, Quakers, and members of the Episcopal Church, helped turn it into a school. White Southern gentlemen sent their African American children there during the Civil War for safety and for an education.
Tawawa House was a joint endeavor of many people, slave African Americans, freed African Americans, white staff, runaways, people who had bought their freedom, many different kinds of people. And they all worked very hard to make it a success.
Tawawa House became the first university managed by African Americans for African American students. It was called Wilberforce University after the famous British abolitionist William Wilberforce.
My mother was so fascinated as she did more reading and more research about the history of Wilberforce and the history of that area that she just felt like it called for music, it called for an opera. It called for an artistic work.
And then I did an opera from a commission from the Ohio Arts Council.
Oh.
The Humanities and Arts Council together.
An opera. Now,
yeah.
What's the name of your opera?
Tawawa House.
Tawawa.
And it is a historical rendition, a musical rendition of the history of the Wilberforce community.
Oh.
And in the beginning, it was called Tawawa Springs. And the hotel there was the largest one this side of the Appalachian Mountains at the time, with 200 rooms.
A big hotel
Big
over
hotel.
at Wilberforce, Ohio.
Yeah, yes, it was called Tawawa Springs.
Now, did somebody help you write the words?
No.
The history?
I did 5 years of research on the history.
Oh my
And
goodness.
made up my text there.
Oh my gosh, and then you did all the music too.
Right.
I'm Jeannie Gale Poole, and I'm Zenobia Powell Perry's biographer. I did the reconstruction and reorchestration of Tawawa House. Zenobia Powell Perry was born in 1908 in Boley, Oklahoma. Her father was the mayor of Boley and was a physician who specialized in delivering babies. Her mother, Bertie Thompson, was Creek Indian, and Bertie's father, Charlie Thompson, had been a former slave. He was born in 1839 and lived until 1947. He sang the spirituals for Zenobia, and she wrote them down, recording the words and melodies as he sang them, and thus became a primary source on pre-Civil War African American life and music.
Well, the very first person that made me start writing was my piano teacher, which was Nathaniel Dett. Well, anyway, he was giving me music lessons because he and my father were friends. And I told my father I wanted to take music. And he says, well, I'll have to get you with Nat. That's what he called Nathaniel Dett. So I went to Dett for a piano lesson. He gave me a piano sonata by Beethoven. I practiced on this little piece. It was in C minor, which is not quite as happy as some of the other things. And I practiced and practiced and practiced. And then I changed it and did some more practicing. And Dett came in. I didn't even hear him come into the room. And he cleared up his throat. When he did, I stopped. He said, what was that you were playing? I said, that was the Beethoven sonata. He said, no, it wasn't. I said, well, it was the arpeggios, but I changed them. He says, yeah, that's what you did. Now, don't ever do that. If you want to practice a piece, you practice the way the man wrote it. If you don't like the way he wrote it, write your own. And he turned around and walked out of the room. I think he just wanted me to be sure that I would be producing whatever it was I was changing and not doing it from somebody else. And then when I got to the end of that particular semester, my father told me to come home. So I had to go home. And I told my mother I wanted to be a musician. And she said, don't tell your daddy that, because he doesn't like musicians.
Zenobia's father sent her to Hampton College in Virginia to study medicine. He wanted her to become a nurse and return to Boley to assist him in his medical practice. But she took a nursing class and fainted at the sight of blood and decided she could never become a nurse. She wanted to study music. She took the money her parents gave her for Hampton and followed Nathaniel Dett to the Eastman School of Music in Rochester, New York, where he was a graduate student of Dr. Howard Hanson. She studied with Nathaniel Dett and assumed she was enrolled in the preparatory division of Eastman. Many years later, she realized that she had not been enrolled and had paid Mr. Dett as a private student. She began her education all over again when she went to Tuskegee Institute in Alabama in the mid-1930s. There, she became the assistant to William Dawson, conductor of the Tuskegee Choir. The choir performed the spirituals live on radio broadcasts out of Atlanta, and she was the pianist. Those broadcasts led to a national revival of the spirituals during the 1930s. Mr. Dawson had her play Chopin for the interludes.
Being a work student, see, I couldn't tell my father that I was a music major. So I went as a work student, and I worked my way through with some help from my father, but he didn't know what he was doing.
After Tuskegee, Zenobia did graduate studies at the University of Northern Colorado in Greeley in education. She became faculty at Arkansas A&M University in Pine Bluff, now the University of Arkansas. While teaching in Arkansas, she studied at the University of Wyoming, where she met French composer Darius Milhaud, who became her teacher and mentor. She continued her studies with him in the 1950s at the Aspen Music Festival in Colorado. From Arkansas, she moved to Wilberforce, Ohio, where she took a position at Central State University in 1955. While on the faculty in the 1970s, Zenobia became very interested in the history of Wilberforce and that entire region of southwestern Ohio. She discovered the story of Tawawa House and how the resort hotel became a university for African American students during the Civil War.
My name is Janice Rosina Perry, and I am the daughter of Zenobia Powell Perry, who was the composer of Tawawa House. Mother, when she got near retirement, Mother was curious, and she had taken so much for granted about her own background, you know, growing up in an all-black town with a father who was the mayor there, being in a position where she understood that black people had power. But as she got older, she got curious about how that fact, that is, an African American being in a place where they had power, how that impacted them, and also how that came about. And she also got curious about the Underground Railroad, which Wilberforce and that whole area was a very important stop of the Underground Railroad. So she got curious, and as mothers was wont to do, when she got curious about something, she had to research it. She had to find out what was going on.
When Zenobia asked local residents if they knew the history of the area and about Tawawa House, she was surprised to find that they knew nothing of it. She decided to write a dramatic work to teach the truth of this remarkable story.
And I said, well, people in Wilberforce don't even know this. We've got to straighten this out. So I wrote an opera, and that's what the opera is about. It's called Tawawa House.
I met Zenobia in New York City when she came to visit her daughter, Janice. I began programming Zenobia's music on concerts, and we became very good friends. When I visited my parents in Ohio, I also went to visit Zenobia in Wilberforce. I knew her very well and consider it a privilege to know her and be her friend. I wrote her biography for my PhD dissertation, and it was published by Scarecrow Press in 2008. At the end of her life, she was very ill. She was 95, and told me she couldn't leave yet because Tawawa House still needed to be revised. There was a concert version of the work in 1987 at Central State University, but she wanted to change it and expand the work. This was her most important piece as a composer. I promised her that if she had to leave, I would make sure that the opera was completed and that it would be performed. And I kept my promise. In 2013, my friend, Dr. Deborah Kavash, and I were talking about things on our bucket list. I told her about Tawawa House, and she told me about the Townsend Opera Company and offered to introduce me to director Matthew Buckman.
My name is Matthew Buckman. I'm the General Director of Townsend Opera in Modesto, California. Jeannie Poole was the official biographer of the original composer and was seeking to publish the work. And she was introduced to me through a mutual colleague, Debbie Kavash, who was the chair of the music department at Stanislaus State. And she provided an introduction and got us together for a meeting. And Jeannie told me about the work and told me what she was trying to do with it. And I liked the idea of it. It fit very, very well within what our mission was evolving to be at the time. And Debbie obviously knew that. So she thought it would be a good fit for us. She created this opportunity for us to talk about it, and we went from there.
After Matt agreed to produce the work, I sat down and began work on the restoration. I had one large box of original sketches and photocopies of various versions of the opera, including several different piano vocal scores. Much of the material was handwritten. There was no clear roadmap about how this opera was to be put together, and most of the documents were not dated. The first job was to work on the libretto. I gathered together all of the texts and typed up all the bits and pieces of dialogue I could find. It totaled some 140 pages, and this did not include the lyrics to the spirituals and other songs in the opera. The criticism of the original production was that there was too much dialogue and not much action on the stage. There were long monologues and a large part for a narrator. There were many decisions to make about what to cut, and Zenobia's daughter, Janice, and I had many discussions about it. Zenobia had to make many changes at the last minute for the first production to accommodate her limited budget and the talent of the mostly volunteer cast. The performances of the Townsend Opera Company involved some of the best American opera singers around, and no expense was spared with the sets, costumes, and orchestra. Because we had a professional orchestra, I was able to restore many of the difficult music to the opera that had to be left out of the original production. Once the libretto was finalized, I started to reorchestrate the score, using the few pieces that Zenobia had fully orchestrated as a guide. Unfortunately, she did not write transitional music to take us from one scene into another, and I was able to use what she had written to create these segues. It took me more than a year to reconstruct and reorchestrate the opera, and the results are about 2.5 hours of music.
My mother would have been very happy with the work that Jeannie did in terms of orchestration, because mother was a wonderful musician and she had a great deal of talent, but orchestration was not her strong suit. So I'm very, very glad that Jeannie took it upon herself to do the orchestrations for this piece, and I think mother would have been very happy with that.
What is truly amazing to me is that Zenobia wrote this opera without any idea how she would ever get it produced. She did not have an orchestra at the college or even an opera program or a large chorus, but she was so clear in her vision for this piece that she forged ahead with the hope that it would be done someday. What an act of faith. She began work on this opera in her early 80s and worked on it until her death at the age of 95, with little financial support or even a promise of a production.
Writing opera requires a real firm commitment from the composer. Many people write because they feel inspired to do so. Some people write because they've been commissioned to do so. If you're writing because you're inspired, you have to keep yourself inspired. You have to keep hold to your vision.
Fanny Mendelssohn Hensel, a 19th century German Jewish composer and sister to Felix Mendelssohn, wrote that she considered it a sign of talent that she did not give up composition, although she found no support for her work. I think that this is Zenobia's story too. Her perseverance is a sign of talent.
I say amen to that.
know, this show has been really interesting to work with. But I think the really enjoyable part of this is getting to work with a different segment of the community that you would typically not work with. We partnered with Sankofa Theater Company on this. It's an African-American theater company that started just a couple years ago to present African-American historical works.
My name is Greg Savage. I'm one of the co-founders of Sankofa Theater Company. Really, the mission of Sankofa is to, of course, put the true story of African American culture out there, but also to teach young people, young African Americans, and give them an opportunity, get involved in something other than basketball, football, baseball, sports.
My name is Elizabeth Stewart Garman, and I am a founding member of Sankofa Theater Company. Sankofa, it comes from, it's an African term that relates back to the san is to return, the ko is to go, and the fa is to look, to seek, to take. Because sometimes our history isn't told. And sometimes some of that history, we have to take it back.
Sankofa as a Akan saying, West African, saying that literally means you can go into your past, take what's good from that past and bring it forth in the future. And so that's why when we looked at the Tawawa, how it fit within the Sankofa definition and what Sankofa is all about.
During the rehearsal for the opera, there was a substantial and significant dialogue that took place between the opera company and the Sankofa Theater Company about how to tell this story. The collaboration resulted in a very successful production.
My name is Ryan Murray. I'm the music director for Townsend Opera, and I'm conducting this show. It's been great. I mean, anytime you do a new work, there's a specific set of challenges that come along with that, but there's also kind of an exciting sense of discovery and kind of creating something new for the first time. It's been a great experience.
I think with doing a premiere, the biggest challenge is just the unknown, because with Figaro or Bohème or whatever it may be, you come in with, in some cases, hundreds of years of performance history. Everybody has studied every inch of every piece of music of those works. And so when you do it, you know exactly what to expect. Everybody who comes into the work and in their given roles knows exactly what their role is supposed to be and how it plays into the whole story. And so when you're doing a new work, you don't know any of that.
My name is Anthony Prentice McGlawn, and I'm singing the role of Eddie. Working on a premiere performance is a very exciting thing because there's no blueprints. There's no hype you have to live up to. There are no traditions. There are no performance practices. You get to create those. You get to be that person that sets the precedent for those that come after you, and that can develop a character and develop the music and develop how the story happens and the action happens. Being in a world premiere is a fun thing. No pressure though, no pressure.
My name is Shawnette, and I'm playing the role of Fanny. When you're working on a premiere, you're creating the role, so it's quite different.
My role is Candy. I like the role because it supports Fanny, who is the main character. She is basically there to show that relationship, that there's love and family and connection, and they were very dedicated to family. And I don't think that's told enough either in the African American experience.
I've just been trying to think a lot about what being alive during the Civil War era and beforehand would have been like for someone like me. In the libretto, it gives a character a description of her. It says she's everyone's big sister, and she runs the hotel staff at Tawawa House, and she's with her sister. They ran away from their master, who is also their father, and they're in search of their mother, who got sold before they ran away. So I'm trying to imagine what that would be like. I think that she had to be a pretty steely character, because those are pretty daunting circumstances if you think about it.
Creating the character of Eddie it's been fun. I can relate to him on many levels. I have a very jovial, gregarious personality, and I think that's who he is. But I'm also a very hard worker, which is what he was. He was the groundskeeper for the hotel, and it was manual labor, hard manual labor in the South in the heat, and getting to balance the work and play of this person. He's serious, but yet he brings a lot of joy to life, and he doesn't let things get him down very easily, and he's a kind of go with it kind of guy. But he's also committed to the school. He's committed to his family and friends who are at Tawawa House, and putting all that together has been an interesting experience.
My name is Leslie Sandifer, and my role is Jinsi in Tawawa House. I really have enjoyed playing Jinsi. It's nice to play the bubbly one. You know, I think that Jinsi's more bubbly and young and fun.
I am V. Savoy McElwain, and the role in the show is Theo. He came from Cincinnati, and he earned his freedom with a bunch of people that he worked with, and they found their way over to Tawawa House via the Ohio River. And Theo has made his living doing anything that can make him get ahead. He finds his love and passion in sitting there and in shining shoes, and also relating that into his life and his goals and aspirations to get further. And he has these dreams of getting up to Lake Erie and working on steamboats. Because he hears that there's colored men working on steamboats up there, and it just seems like a lofty dream for him.
My name is Barry Robinson, and I'm playing the role of Jake. He raises horses and tends to the horses at Tawawa House, and his character, you know, he's a loving guy. He's in love with Fanny, and she's kind of very distant, but so he's kind of in love with her and trying to win her over.
Okay, well, it's funny. My name is Willie Williams, and I play the role of Will. My favorite piece in the show is the end of Act 1, Fare Ye Well. Everybody's just sitting on the stage partying and just having a great time. And I love it because it's not just the black actors, it's the Caucasian actors as well. And we're all just interacting with each other and just loving each other, just shaking each other's hands, just having a grand time. Like I said, I'm from church, so I got to bring it back to heaven. I believe heaven is going to be that way. Heaven is going to have every race, and we're all going to be together celebrating. So it kind of brought that to my remembrance.
Actually, my favorite number is They Call the Sun, or Hana. That's one of my songs. It's short, but it's profound. It really speaks about the turmoil that one goes through when they're working in the fields, whether it's picking cotton or not. The sun is beating down on them. And it's like, oh, I can do this work, but Lord, please don't let the sun come up anymore. So that is definitely my favorite, and it keeps playing in my head over and over and over. I can't shake it right now.
My favorite part in the production is the church scene that we're having on the porch, because I think the preacher is just really authentic and fabulous, and I think that it really shows the spirit of the show. I think the spirit of the show is just eternal optimism and hope, and so you can really see each character expressing that individually through their songs and their dialogue, that they just never give up hope. And I think that really expresses how African Americans felt back then, and they still feel like they just, never give up. Keep going, and God will see you through.
I think that is underlying. There's always hope. Always. That despite adversity, that if people work together, if they have a common goal, and we can let go of our personal prejudices, our personal biases, and fear of the unknown, anything can happen.
I think my mother would be in seventh heaven if she were here. Absolutely seventh heaven. mother had a lifelong commitment to spirituals. She really was steeped in the whole matter of spirituals because spirituals were very much the songs of worship at the churches where she was as a child. Her grandfather, my great-grandfather, sang spirituals all the time around the house, and there were certain ones that that he just could never let go.
So a lot of the music is based on African American spirituals, and because of that, there's just these wonderful melodies that make up the show. But Zenobia is was a very creative composer, so she takes traditional harmony and then isn't afraid to add chromatic notes and atonal notes, and really is an interesting color palette, a lot of changing between major and minor, sometimes within the same bar. So there's definitely a 20th century aspect to it as well.
So I think this opera is really beautiful because it does incorporate so many favorite spirituals, and I think that we miss hearing them, and you know, this opera really showcases all of the beautiful songs but gives them, you know, the arrangement is very unique, it's very refreshing, and so I think it can appeal to a lot of people.
Well, the use of the spiritual in this opera per se is really great. It's first and foremost, a lot of people hear the spirituals and they're like, oh, those are wonderful tunes, but they don't necessarily know the history behind it.
They don't have, I think, the same meaning for some people. Didn't my Lord deliver Daniel? And didn't my Lord deliver Daniel? Then why not every man? That's a question, you know, and I think that this play answers it. Why not every man? And it's like for this, the people are singing the songs, they get to the part where they have the lovely, you know, melodies and stuff, but the words, if my Lord delivered Daniel, then why not me? Why am I a slave? And so I love the idea that these words and these songs and the sentiment can be now discussed because it's just part of history. This is a history lesson in the words.
It's not only is it nice, but it's educational because we sing them different now. And so it's nice to know where these songs came from and why they were sung then as opposed to why they're sung now. Now we sing them more of a sometimes even sentimental or nostalgic. But back then, they had a lot of meaning to them.
We weren't able to speak our own language when African Americans came across the water. That language was stripped, our culture was stripped, our names were stripped, so everything was stripped. So we had to learn everything new, how to communicate. And going back to the spirituals, a lot of our communication was done through song because we had to do everything secretly.
A lot of spirituals, their words, they have double meanings, you know. They're signals, you know, of how to escape and how to reach the north. And, you know, Jake, one of the characters, sings "Follow the drinking gourd," which means follow the North Star. That's how you get north. So they're emboldening you spiritually and in this life now.
I think those songs have dual purposes. It's the spiritualness of God saying, this is what I have done, and then it's a message. It's used as a weapon for you know, for what they needed to accomplish.
Another song that, Hallelujah, oh Peter go ring them bells, people didn't understand. And it was actually an experience while we were in choir one day. They were like laughing at the songs because they didn't understand what they meant. And we had an opportunity. So I found it to be a learning experience. And you know, that I thought everybody knew what these songs meant. And I found that it didn't. So I learned something, and then it was also a teaching experience to teach them a little bit about history and so that they can appreciate what they're singing.
They have so much meaning. I think that you couldn't come up with a song like that on your own. I think it's a God-given song, something that God ordained. I think this whole production is God ordained. When you have somebody who has a gift like that, it's not just for the family, it's to be spread abroad. And I think that that's why this is happening. It's bigger than we are.
And I think they're still relevant today. In the African American community, you know, faith and religion are are mostly a very strong part of the culture. And I think it comes from those times where you really needed to believe in things that weren't just what you were seeing. Because if you did, I don't know how far any of us would have made it. And the tradition of the spirituals goes on, to this day.
Spirituals are the progenitor of the blues, of jazz, of bluegrass, rhythm and blues. All of those things that we celebrate as American music have their roots in the spiritual. It's essential to the American identity and inextricable from it.
In our African American community, everything that we do musically now has derived from those spirituals. So culturally, is not only is it necessary, but it's absolutely mandatory that we know about this kind of stuff. I grew up in the church, and we teach that, we need to know our history, because if we don't know it, then we'll repeat it.
One of the reasons that Mother wrote Tawawa House is because she wanted to emphasize the fact that the end of slavery, the struggle toward equality and justice in this country, was an effort on the parts of many different kinds of people, of African Americans, of white Americans, of Native Americans. And I think that Mother wanted to emphasize that it was not a magical thing where suddenly some African Americans rose up and fought off the evil masters. It was an effort on the part of many people who had to function in many different arenas to make this happen. It was very important for her to know this. My mother was a big believer in community and the need to understand that all of us have to work in these things together to make them happen.
That's what I thought most interesting about Tawawa House, that a lot of times we want to think of the negative things that happened in slavery because it was such a horrible and awful experience for all involved that it's hard to see the beauty in it. And as an English teacher, I teach English and I teach 7th and I teach 8th graders. And when we talk about Harriet Tubman and different figures, Frederick Douglass, we go over that in our text. I just see the white students cringe. And it's kind of nice that this story is coming out because it gives us a chance to explore our history and see what the good people of both races did. That in an evil system such as slavery, that there were good people on both ends that were contributing to that. And that's kind of why I liked it, because for years I was trying to figure out, how do I tell my students, yeah, there were some bad people. There were a lot of bad people, but there were good people that helped to eliminate that system, and the African American people couldn't have done it without their help. They couldn't have. And so I love the fact that Tawawa House talked about that. And it's an uncomfortable history to discuss. Even like talking to you, it's uncomfortable because you don't want to offend. But how are we going to get past? We have to reach back and look at it and examine it, put it under the microscope.
It's a history that I think needs to be told, and I think there are African Americans that feel uncomfortable with the history, but there are also white Americans that feel uncomfortable with the history. It's almost like a part of history that people want to forget about, but we can't let it go. We can't let people forget about it, because there's still segregation, discrimination going on in this country today.
Zenobia believed that people should be judged by their character and by their behavior, and not by skin color. This was problematic throughout her life. She was often judged as an African American woman, a Native American woman, or as a Black Native American woman, and these factors were used to exclude her from many opportunities throughout her life.
Scott Joplin wrote a grand folk opera, Tremonisha, and spent the rest of his resources and life trying to get it performed. William Grant Still wrote no less than 9 grand operas. Only one was performed by a major company in his lifetime. None have been performed at the Met, which I find astonishing. I don't want to think that institutional racism is so pervasive that it prevents us from seeing the greater picture and the greater prize of imbuing all of our citizens, getting all of our stories told. I would like instead to think that there is just people understand what they see last, or what has already been successful. The works of Anthony Davis, the works of William Grant Still, the works of Scott Joplin, the works of H. Lawrence Freeman are not yet part of the repertory, but most certainly can become that, the works of Zenobia Powell Perry. There's hope.
Are you a workaholic?
Yes, I have to be. Music is that sort of mistress. She doesn't allow you to do anything but music.
Oh.
And when I'm not writing, I'm practicing.
We hope that you who see this documentary will help us make it possible for millions of people to see this opera and learn about this remarkable American story about blacks and whites working together to change the country through their commitment to human rights and to education. We hope you will contact us if you are interested in producing this work or helping to fund its production, publication, recording, and distribution. This is a story that needs to be heard.